Hello and welcome to this week's episode of This Week in Civics. Citizenship is hard work and the Bill of Rights Institute is here to help. So my name is Rachel Davison-Humphreys, and every week we come together to look at what's happening in civics, history, and at the Bill of Rights Institute. We love to hear from you during this episode, so ask your questions on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. We're live streaming there every Monday morning. And we're here to talk about what's happening in civics this week. So with everything that's happening in the news, we wanted to talk about and think about presidential power and foreign entanglements. With the conflict between Israel and Palestine dominating the news this week, it's important for us to work with our students and with ourselves about who in the US government has the responsibility in these situations. Who gets to decide what is done in the name of the United States? So firstly, if you want to talk more about the conflict, we have a bunch of links down below. BBC 3 days ago put out a new kind of explainer called Israel-Gaza Violence, the Conflict Explained. Then there's a United Nations piece about the question of Palestine, which is really fascinating because the United Nations had a big part in adjudicating how the Israel-Palestine borders were decided. And then lastly, we have a couple of Vox pieces. So Vox back in 2014 published 9 questions about the Israel-Palestine conflict that you were too embarrassed to ask. This is a great resource for any adult person, but especially young people who maybe just don't feel like they have any of the background knowledge to be able to think about all of these issues. And then in 2015, Vox followed up with the 11 biggest myths about Israel-Palestine. That's another great kind of listicle that's really well researched and great to get the conversation started. So when we're talking about who has the right and who has the responsibility to direct US involvement in foreign affairs, we look at the president and the president's power in the field of foreign relations. So in 1937, the Presidential Office of Legal Counsel published an essay entitled The Presidential Power in the Field of Foreign Relations. Now, yeah, this was published in 1937, but it's still very current. A link to this document is down below. The whole set of documents on the is really fascinating. So we linked to that as well. But the opening of this document says that there are 2 major contentions regarding the extent of the president's power in the field of foreign relations. One, that the president, as chief executive, has the sole and unlimited power, that is his designation in the Constitution as the depositary of the executive power, which is in itself a source of power. And 2, that while the president is the chief executive, is the sole spokesman of the nation in the field of foreign relations, Congress, as the lawmaking body, may prescribe the policy to be followed, and the president, in dealing with foreign relations, must keep within this policy. The controversy between the exponents of these 2 views has existed since the beginning of our constitutional government. It reached bitter proportions during Washington's administration, which we'll explore a little bit. With Alexander Hamilton championing the first position and James Madison championing the second, the first position being that the president has ultimate authority, the second that no, it's Congress's authority and the president has to live within those bounds. And the occasion for this debate was the issuance of the President Washington in 1793 with the proclamation of neutrality in respect to the war between Great Britain and France. So this conflict about who has responsibility and who has the rights to make decisions has gone back to the establishment of the separation of powers. There's another article in this book called Domestic Determinants of Foreign Policy. In chapter 7, it says, the legal scholar Edward S. Corrin famously wrote that the US Constitution is an invitation to struggle for the privilege of directing American foreign policy. Corwin's dictum highlights 2 critical points about the executive-legislative relations. First, both the president and the Congress possess significant foreign policy powers. These powers overlap, laying the groundwork for conflict and competition. Second, the Constitution's invitation to struggle is just that, an invitation. It by no means mandates that presidents and Congress will struggle to direct American foreign policy. Whether they do or not is a matter of politics and not law. which branch of government holds the upper hand in directing foreign policy has changed substantially over the course of American history. So again, that's chapter 7 from the book, Domestic Determinants of Foreign Policy. We link to that down below as well. So this is a complex issue. It's complicated. It's complicated for you. It's complicated for many adults, and certainly complicated for young people in classrooms. So BRI is here to help. And we want to share a bunch of the resources that we have around foreign policy and presidential powers. So firstly is our landmark resource called Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit of Happiness. It was just published last year. There we designed an activity with Mount Vernon that actually looks at George Washington's foreign policies, comparing his policy across the United States. We have a link to that down below. Also in Life, Liberty, and Pursuit of Happiness, we have a couple of fantastic essays written by John Moser at Ashland University. We have Foreign Policy in the 1930s from Neutrality to Involvement, which explains the similarities and differences in attitudes about the nation's popular role in the world. We then have the U.S. Foreign Relations Between the Wars, another essay by John Moser, where we explain the similarities and differences in attitudes about the nation's proper role in the world. We have a great homework help video called Early 1800s in U.S. Foreign Policy. And then we also have in our Gilded Age and Progressive Era curriculum, so that's a resource that we published, I think, 3 years ago now. We have an activity called The Evolution of American Foreign Policy, and where it has excerpts from different presidents at different periods, thinking about what the foreign policy should be. And there we also look at this George Washington address in his farewell address, where he says, "The great rule of conduct for us in regard to foreign nations is extending our commercial relations, to have with them as little political connection as possible. So far as we have already formed engagements, let them be fulfilled with perfect good faith. Here let us stop." So then again, this is George Washington in 1796. "Europe has a set of primary interests which to us have none, or a very remote relation. Hence, she must be engaged in frequent controversies, the causes of which are essentially foreign to our concerns. Hence, therefore, it must be unwise to us to implicate ourselves by artificially tying the ordinary vicissitudes of her politics or the ordinary combinations and collisions of her friendships or enmities. Why, by interweaving our destiny with that of any part of Europe, entangle our peace and prosperity with the toils of European ambition, rivalship, interest, humor, or caprice?" And so that question is still very much what guides us. What is our responsibility to others? What is our responsibility to ourselves? What is the tension between those when we think about how we engage around the world? The Foreign Policy Association is going to leave us with the last thought. There's this, when they're discussing the role of foreign policy, how US foreign policy is made on their website, they say, "America's foreign policy is an expression of its goals in the world and how it proposes to achieve them, a reflection of the nation's interests and a guideline of how to interact with other countries. Global independence and the breakdown of traditional barriers has increased the complexity of foreign policy making. Understanding how foreign policy is made and conducted in the US is crucial to participating in the democratic project." So as we think about foreign relations, foreign entanglements, what's happening overseas and in our backyard, it's important to think about our role and our responsibility. And BRI is here to help you do that with tons of resources. They're all linked below. Again, if you ever want to talk about something in particular, reach out to us. We're on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. I'm here every week with what's happening in civics this week. So This Week in Civics with Rachel Davis and Humphreys. I look forward to hearing from you. Reach out, chat. We'll answer any questions, and I want to hear what you're doing with these resources. So